Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today and this rainy day in the south of Wisconsin. I know it's snowing for some of you further north. Timely because today we're talking about sustainable winter salt maintenance. And we have Wisconsin Saltwise team here and American Family to share their stories with you. So really quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to do a very brief introduction to who WSBC is for those of you who are new to us. Then I'm going to hand it over to Allison, who's going to talk about the Wisconsin Saltwise program, dive into best practices, and then we'll hear from American Family. Of course, these webinars are the best when you participate and get all of your questions answered. So please feel free to use the chat at any time with any questions that you have, and or there'll be a time at the end where you can jump in and ask any questions that you have for the team here today. So my name is Jessie Servi-Ortiz. I am the Managing Director of the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council. We are owned and operated by WMEP Manufacturing Solutions. It's WSBC's mission to advance sustainability through the power of business. We really primarily do this through helping with education, so webinar series like this. We have a Green Masters program tool that helps you to measure and improve your sustainability outcomes. And then we facilitate connection amongst those working on sustainability. So membership is really our primary program. In addition to the Green Masters program, we do have a gamification of sustainability called Cool Choices, which is a member benefit, and anyone can pay to play as well. But we have an annual game that members play in April of every year. So that's a fun member perk and a fun game to play. We also have an awards program and then programs that help you sort of either build upon, enhance, or further develop your sustainability programming. So I briefly touched on our membership benefits, education. There's free webinars like this to our members. We have a member portal where you get access to all of the previous recordings. So this will be stored in your member portal. We also have working groups and peer-to-peer groups. I mentioned our Green Masters program, which is in a redevelopment phase right now, and we'll be launching early Q2 of this year, which is very exciting for us. We also facilitate connection with virtual networking. Our annual conference is a great way for our members to connect with one another. And then we help share our member stories, like American Family is here today to share their story about becoming Saltwise. So just real quick, some of the upcoming events that may interest you. In February, we're teaming up with Wisconsin Clean Cities to talk about resources for businesses and transportation. International Women's Day is March 8th, and every year our Women in Sustainability group hosts a program for that. So that will be on International Women's Day to celebrate equity in sustainability. We have a working group on greenhouse gas. The next meeting for that group is March 9th. I mentioned our Cool Choices game will run in April, so that starts April 3rd. And then we have a networking event coming up in April for members. And as always, you can find our website, wisconsinsustainability.com, and it's just /upcoming events to find what's coming up. So my email address is just Jessie, Jessy, at wisconsinsustainability.com. If you ever need any support on your sustainability journey, that's what we're here for, to help. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. Really briefly, I'm going to introduce each of our speakers today. We have Allison Madison with us. She's the program manager for Wisconsin Saltwise. We also have Casey Olson, facilities program analyst with American Family Insurance, and Wayne Rayfield, who's a landscape architect and the facility land management administrator for American Family. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now and hand it over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Jessie. And thanks everybody for joining in. As Jessie said, I really do welcome questions. So feel free to type those into the chat, and maybe Jessie, you can help me keep an eye on that as I go along here. So I'm going to pull up my slides. All right. So Wisconsin Saltwise is the organization I work for. And it's a coalition of nonprofits, businesses, and municipalities across the state that are working to reduce salt use. So American Family is one of our champions in the Madison area, but we have a number of stories from all different kind of organizations and businesses across the state. And I think today my goal would be to convince some or many of you to become some of our future champions and partners. So why talk about salt? Well, we're going to get to water. That's the big driver here in a group that's concerned about sustainability, but a few other reasons why others are thinking and making changes in regards to salt use. And the number one, of course, no surprise here, is the cost of salt. So this is data shared with us from Wisconsin DOT, and the cost that they are paying per ton for salt has almost tripled in the last 20 years. And so that's really been a driver for changes from the state kind of county level, because in Wisconsin, counties maintain our state highways and down. In addition to the cost that we pay for salt outright, as those of us who are versed in sustainability really understand, does not cover the full cost of salt. So what do we see? We see a lot of damage that salt does directly to vegetation and to vegetation through damage done to soil. And these are estimates of damage nationwide. But I would say they're pretty much on the low end at this point, especially with inflation the last few years. We also see a lot of damage done to our infrastructure. Salt corrodes metal, prematurely ages roads, bridges, infrastructure like our hardscaping around buildings. A lot of people definitely see the damage that salt does to personal vehicles. And so all in all, for every dollar that we spend on salt, we're doing about $10 of damage to our infrastructure. So salt begins to look a little less cheap. I put up a few photos here that might kind of bring this home to people. Once you begin to see the damage that salt does on your property, this might be personal property, your business, it's really hard to unsee that. The lack of, grass growing along sidewalks or pavement in the spring, damage to that concrete, or maybe, doors that need to be replaced more frequently, much less, the damage done inside the buildings if we're tracking excess salt in. So I really want to focus right now on that idea of extra salt. Our organization, SaltWise, is about being smart about salt. We're not saying we're not going to use salt, don't use salt, but we're saying let's use it wisely. Let's use salt just as needed. And so if we see extra salt down after a storm event and the snow's gone, ice is gone, and there's still salt there, that means we applied too much salt. And extra salt, as you can clearly see in this photo, does damage, right? But it doesn't keep us safer. So we're not here having an argument about safety or sustainability, but both, right? Both and. So salt, when excess is applied, can actually be a hazard, a tripping hazard itself. So I want us to keep that in kind of the forefront here. This extra salt is not keeping us safer. There is, though, a driver there. Fear is a big driver. Fear of liability lawsuits. And in New Hampshire right now, they do have a program that certifies contractors in smart salting practices and then gives them limited liability protection against lawsuits. And that liability protects the property owners as well. So we have a draft bill right now in Wisconsin that mirrors that work right now in New Hampshire. So happy to talk about this more. Definitely looking for support as we work with State Senator Andre Jacques to get this introduced this session. So excess salt does not keep us safer. Recognizing that's a driver, we're still going to try to target that. But that salt does damage infrastructure and it degrades our fresh water. So I'm going to focus on that for a bit here. We see salt, namely sodium and chloride concentrations increasing in our water, which makes sense because every year for a number of decades now, we've been bringing mountains of salt into our state. And that salt seems to disappear, right, with the snow, but it doesn't, right? We know, again, from a sustainability lens, there is no away, nothing goes away. So all the salt that we bring in and put down on our roads, our sidewalks, we put in our water softeners, it's all making its way into our fresh water, which is becoming every year less and less fresh. So there aren't many areas of the state where we have good longitudinal data to show these trends. But Madison, the city of Madison, has done a lot of data collection, and we can see the average chloride concentrations increasing here in municipal wells. This top well that is now, the top whisker, excuse me, is well 14, right along a pretty big thoroughfare in Madison. Has gotten to the point where some residents say they can taste the salt, and the city utility is looking at needing to replace this well in the next 10 years. But it's not just a Madison problem. We see chloride and sodium concentrations increase really across the state. This is data from UW Stevens Point Well Water Viewer. This is available publicly online. I'm happy to share the link for this if you want to zoom in and see what's going on in your corner of the state. And all of this data is actually from private wells. So we're talking more rural areas. And naturally in Wisconsin, our chloride concentrations should be pretty much close to 0, like 0 to 10. And that's not what we see anymore. In addition to chloride, though, sodium is the #1 health concern. So I have here a brand new map put together by Kevin Masaryk in the UW Stevens Point Water Lab. And we can see that sodium concentrations, which again, through much of the state, would be pretty much 0, 0 to 5, maybe 10 in a few areas. Superior, Green Bay, Racine and Kenosha, though, there are some elevated sodium concentrations, but yellow, definitely like light green, yellow, kind of orange dots that we're seeing anywhere else in the state are pretty much clearly due to us. Anthropogenically elevated sodium concentrations. So now we're drinking salty water. And if someone is supposed to be in a low sodium diet, they're supposed to be drinking water under 20 milligrams per liter. So it's not just our drinking water, though. If people are concerned about greater environmental impacts, we can see those salt concentrations just go up and up, also in our freshwater lakes and streams. So again, in the Madison area, where we have more longitudinal data, we can see that fairly steady climb upwards. Across the state, again, not as much longitudinal data, but we can see those trends where chloride concentrations that should be between 0 and 10 are now up into the 10s, the 100s, and even the thousands of milligrams per liter. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, we have acute and chronic toxicity limits that are set. And unfortunately, those are not really protective based on kind of the newest research that we have, but I do have a few slides to kind of share what those are and share some of the concerns that we see. So research coming out of the University of Toledo and Bill Hintz's lab shows the direct impacts that high salt has on freshwater organisms. So we see reduced rates of growth, reduced rates of reproduction, higher susceptibility to parasites. It's just a stressor on their system, just like too much salt is a stressor on our bodies as well. At more of an ecosystem, kind of food web level, we see zooplankton are the first species to be impacted. When chloride gets up to 50 milligrams per liter, and again, remember, we've seen hundreds and thousands in Wisconsin, we see declines in zooplankton populations. This means a couple things. One, it's not, well, a few things. It's not good for them. Two, they eat algae. So if zooplankton population goes down, it means that algal populations are going to be going up, and we see greener and murkier water. Now, this is in tandem, of course, with the increase of phosphorus that can come in from farm fields, other fertilizers. And then going up the food chain, if we have less zooplankton around, it means there's less food for those fish species. So again, I mentioned I would share kind of those Wisconsin levels. So this red dashed line is the current DNR chronic toxicity limit, the idea that over time, organisms exposed to that will see negative consequences. The black limit is that acute limit, saying even for a short period of time, exposure to that amount of salt is going to be harmful. And in southeastern Wisconsin, a number of streams that have been studied fairly recently, we see spikes way up above that acute toxicity limit. Another thing I would draw your attention to is that even in the summer months, we do not go back down to 0 anymore. And that's because we've salted our groundwater, right? So even in the summer months, we're seeing recharge of salty water into our streams. Additionally, the news is not getting better, unfortunately. The amount of salt that's building up in our soils and groundwater can lead to the formation of chemical cocktails. This is research coming out of the University of Maryland with Dr. Sujay Kaushal, who's actually going to be a speaker on Monday during Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. So I tried to create an animation to make this a little bit more relevant and understandable, digestible for folks. I have a degree in soil science, so I get to geek out for a minute here. But the basic idea is that clay particles in the soil, in our bedrock, and also in like pipes where we have different positively charged particles. So cations, if you're into chemistry, those can change places with one another. We can have ion exchange. And so, for instance, in a clay particle here with little negative charges, as sodium and chloride come by, sodium, which is positively charged, will grab a hold of that clay particle, and the other things are released. So we are seeing the release of other metals and ions into our water, things that we don't want there, that are coming in as we've increased the amount of salt in our water. Chloride moves through, negatively charged, and that's why we see higher concentrations of chloride than sodium in our groundwater. So what can we do about it? Let's focus on that. I've told you enough bad news. Let's focus on the good news. And there is a lot of it to share. So I'm going to just go touch briefly on a number of the best practices that a lot of municipalities, counties across the state have been adopting, and we really need to see adopted more broadly in businesses, private contractors, etc. So number one is storage. This is bad. This is a picture taken last winter behind a mall in Madison. And this is a creek here that is highly impaired with salt. So proper storage is key on your facilities, at your facilities, kind of with the contractors, if you're working with contractors. Then calibration of our equipment. Again, that idea, if we've put down this much salt, that's way too much. That's way beyond what's needed for safety. That much salt should not have gone down to begin with. If it did, it needs to be swept up, and we can learn from that, use less the next time. We've got resources to help support calibration for a variety of equipment on our website. Calibration, like I said, is that first key step. You need to know what you're putting down to put the right amount down. And then there are application rate guides to help you understand, or help your maintenance staff understand how much salt is needed, or how much of a given deicer is needed based on pavement temperatures, I should add. So the Bruce Company, who's worked with the American Family team, who's going to share in just a little bit, locally in the Madison area, they've reduced salt use by 50% through those practices of calibration, and then working on kind of changing up their rates, and also using brine for anti-icing. So people may have seen, lines down the road before the storm. That's called anti-icing. It works like oiling your skillet before you cook, right? If you don't do that, what are you stuck with? A lot of foods just, adhered to your pan, and it's a ton more work to remove that afterwards than if you can prevent that bond from forming in the first place. So anti-icing is a really key step. Also, just applying brine with rock salt, so the salt stays where it needs to be, and that brine is activated, or the salt in it is activated, so it can start that melting immediately. So you can actually get back to better pavement conditions faster when you're using brine instead of just straight rock salt, and also do it with less total salt. The next best practice here is that of removing as much snow as possible. I mean, that's really the key, right? We're trying to clear those pavements off. Salt is one tool, but it should not be our first tool. It should not be the go-to tool. And if we can move towards, better brush tools, sectional plows, sometimes we can avoid using salt altogether. Best practices of evaluating performance, kind of having those conversations internally with the team. How did we do? And working better, of course, every time to really dial in salt use and maybe, talk more about some of those trouble spots and ways to identify them and work with them outside of the winter season. Another example of that evaluation, and then also evaluating the expectations that we've put out there for our staff, for our customers, maybe closing down, an extra stairwell that doesn't need to be maintained throughout the winter and is just, a high risk area to begin with. So resources that we have for that, include in-person and virtual training classes. We've also worked with municipalities and contractors and school districts across the state to host equipment open houses. So if we have leaders in given communities, we invite others to come in to their shop and look at their equipment and hear their stories so that there's just increased network building, as those of you, it sounds like from Jesse, are doing quite a bit of. So would love to help facilitate an equipment open house through this network. We also have monthly webinars, and I would draw everyone's attention to the one on the left here. Now, this is a year and some change old at this point, but Mayo Clinic in Rochester has dramatically reduced salt use. And I always say if Mayo Clinic can do it and still keep people safe, then anybody can tackle this issue. Also wanted to note here our webinar next month on kind of choosing the right de-icer. Just a few other resources that we've got. We've got a number of videos. We're on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, always loving to share success stories and kind of get those out. Again, networking people, showing others what's possible. So this is Ho Chunk Casino dropping salt use by 70% and still keeping people safe. Coming up this next week, we've got Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. I mentioned Sujay Kashal earlier. A number of other kind of really a rock star lineup. So would highly recommend these, and happy to have you share word of these. I can share out other links. So kind of next action steps. I know you're going to hear in just a minute here from the American Family team, Casey and Wayne. But I really would say to take advantage of the trainings that are out there, whether it be for your internal staff, contractors. Again, all of our trainings and resources are free. In addition to winter salt, I just have to put a plug in for water softeners. Again, they can be pretty big salt hogs if they're not optimized to use salt efficiently. So in addition to training, we are happy to work with you to provide resources for you to educate your employees in-house. And then always happy to collaborate with other partners who really value sustainability and our freshwater. So can work with you on different projects, and hopefully one day share more of your success stories. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jesse, whether you want to go to questions or just hand it off to Casey and Wayne right now.
Yeah, sure. We have time if anybody has any specific questions for Allison. I know I did post some of the links that she was referring to into the chat, so you can easily find those. They're just 30-minute talks during Salt Awareness Week. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up for that. So we do have one question that reads, are there certain types of road salt that are combined with other chemicals that are more effective at melting snow and ice than using a smaller amount compared to typical road salt?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I would say that the future kind of chemical de-icers is definitely the use of liquids, as I mentioned. They just go a lot farther and you get faster results. Oftentimes the liquid is just straight salt brine, but straight salt, sodium chloride, is really only effective down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. below that, you need to switch to other deicers. So we've got in the chloride family, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride. So if you do hit those colder temperatures, you want to have at least a blended product. We can also add in other sugars to those brines that work as corrosion inhibitors and help the salt stick in place where it needs to be and can reduce refreeze. So there are a variety of different deicers, but I would really kind of recommend probably Stacy's talk to dive into that a little bit more in February.
Great, thank you. Someone's also asking if you can share the poster of the saltwise. I know you have that, and I don't have it accessible easily. So if you can find time to grab that and put it in or share it out, that would be great. Otherwise, I can send a follow-up email.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just put I'll put my email in the chat, and that if people want that poster, happy to email you like a PDF or JPEG of that.
Great. And there's one more question here that asks about how can homeowners make sure their water softener is appropriately calibrated?
Great question. So you can go to our website and go to the Take Action tab on the top, and then just go to water softeners. And there are a couple tools there for you to take a look at your water softener. There is right now a series, I shouldn't say series, there's an episode on Building Wisconsin TV. We're working with the local plumbers union in the Madison area, and they talk quite a bit about optimization. So unless you're like really geeky, you might not want to try to optimize your softener on your own. I would say the biggest thing is making sure that you have a demand-based system, and there's more information on that on the website, but I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to eat too much into Wayne and Casey's time right now.
Sounds great. And I know Allison shared her email. So if you have specific follow-up questions for her on that, feel free to reach out. All right, I'm going to hand it on over to Casey and Wayne now.
Thanks, Jesse. Allison, thank you. That was a great presentation on behalf, and there might be a little parallel here with what I'm going to be talking about here. So first of all, thank you for letting us tell our story. It's been really a neat journey that we've done with Saltwise, and we'll give you a little bit more into it. So our Saltwise really started out of the fact that American Family developed a sustainable land management strategy, which actually laddered up to our corporate responsibility of it, which means environment, people, and community. And we felt that the Saltwise program really fit all three of those buckets, right? You're dealing with the environment, you're dealing with people, and the community. So once we found out about it, we quickly got certified and started down this journey. And a little bit about our sustainable land management strategy. Again, we wanted to be leaders in sustainable land management, making a difference in our communities, and committed to balancing business value with environmental stewardship through education, collaboration, protection, and restoration. And we've hit all these with numerous different things, including Saltwise. So you can see here just a little bit different view of our pillars of our land management strategy. Again, from left to right, upper right, we have technology and innovation, ecosystems management, education, create awareness, initiate action in our communities, and landscape design and management, restoring and planting native species, a real important aspect of what we do on our land in Madison. So before Saltwise, we have a little different model right now with our winter snow activities removal. But at the time before we got into Saltwise, we weren't aware of what was going on, and we weren't necessarily good stewards of the land as far as salt, and we had our fair share of. I knew when I took these photos back in 16 or 17, hey, something wasn't quite right here, and really over applied, right? And actually we learned really quickly that, yeah, these weren't how we wanted to apply salt. And obviously, as Allison stated, there's a lot of different literature out there about the hidden costs of salt, not only the oversalting and getting charged per ton or per pound, but also the damage to infrastructure. And right about the time that we started the SaltWise program and getting trained, our internal staff getting trained, we had done a deeper dive into our parking ramps at AmFam. We have 3 rather large structures, and it was determined that the structures themselves had deterioration of the metal that was embedded in the concrete, as well as exterior metal that was, you could see, but actual rebar and structural metal inside the rebar was damaged because the chlorides actually in the salt were damaging, penetrating into the concrete. And over 20, 30 years, they started to damage it. Fortunately, we were able to repair that at a cost of several millions, but we did not tear down the ramps because it would have been probably 10 times the cost. So the steps that were taken, again, much like Allison said, at the time we had 2 different contractors, and we had an internal salt or maintenance team as well. So we had 3 different entities out there doing snow removal and salting to create a safe campus. So we got certified. We actually had the city of Madison come in. One of their engineers did the training. And both of our contractors at the time, one of them who's a member here today, I must say, were very cooperative, and that were really at the forefront to help make this work. So that collaboration with our contractors and our internal staff is really what drove it, because without that cooperation, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere, for doing the best practices, recording the salt that they used. These guys are out at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And to remember to write down what they have, taking temperatures of the pavement, and doing all the correct procedures, which is part of the SaltWise program, without that and without that buy-in from them, it could never have worked. So we're really fortunate that we had contractors that were able to go to bat and make it work for us. Not only did that, we included SaltWise verbiages in our contracts. We actually started an internal governance program with SaltWise, which is basically a balance and checks every season of, hey, we set up these policies and procedures internally, but how are we going to monitor these? Well, we visit this every year before, during, and after. It's basically a year-round thing that we do. But we're actually having the governance. We have different triggers during the year, and we go and visit key times. We have meetings with our contractors. We do the balances and checks of the calibrations and the type of product we're putting down, and risk assessment. So being an insurance company, when I brought this up to my upper management and leadership, I said, hey, we can possibly save money, use less salt, and immediately as well, are we going to be as safe for our customers, for our employees, being an insurance company? And I said, great point. So what we did do, I through all the training I had done, I didn't see a problem with having more falls or anything like that. We started to record the slips and falls, and that actually has stayed just level. I'm sure we have a few every year, but there wasn't a huge spike once we started to reduce the salt. And then the last step we took, we actually expanded the SaltWise program into all the Wisconsin facilities we have, but into Eden Prairie, Minnesota, St. Joseph, Missouri, and into Denver. Now, I know SaltWise doesn't exist in those areas, but we were able to, through technology, take the training and take all the stuff we needed to do and train our people at all those different places. Sorry about that. So what do we do as far as our governance? So pre-season, we usually have a kickoff meeting with the AmFam staff and our and our contractors. So in that preseason meeting, it's just a touch base to make sure all the phone numbers are updated with all the staff on each side, to make sure our snow maps, and here you can see a snow map when COVID hit, we started to shut down some of our parking lots and sidewalks because we just weren't using them. We had very few people in the buildings compared to pre-COVID. So we actually started to shut down some areas too, which was another salt-wise tactic to use less salt, as Allison stated too. So, and just to go through all this preseason kickoff with our contractors to make sure we're all on the same page, right? Okay, next. You know, during the season, site checks by our facilities management, and this is where we have a checklist as part of our governance: response time, product use at desired rates, follow site specific requirements, making sure we get bi-monthly data submission from our contractors. So, you know, during the snow season, as the storms keep, now this year it hasn't been like that, but you know, in a heavy snow season, it blends together really quick. So we require that at least bi-monthly, twice every 2 weeks, that we get submission of whatever salt you put down, and then Casey keeps a master list and then a database that we're able to record all the salt we use. Anti-icing, we started to do some pre-treatments. Allison mentioned also about the brine solution. You can see one of our internal staff here, we bought some equipment right about the time in 2016 that we got trained. We bought a spreader, and then we bought some liquid, not straight chloride, but we chose some different product, but had chloride in it, but a CMA product, as Allison had mentioned. And then making sure calibration is kept up. So not only at the beginning of the season, but we're asking our people, hey, you know, you're out in the middle of the night, things get bumped and jostled around. Make sure that calibration is holding. You know, sometimes those things change during the course of being used. And again, like I mentioned, we started to move the SaltWise program out of Wisconsin into Eden Prairie. And it's funny because our facility in Eden Prairie, actually, that's where SaltWise really started, with Connie Fortin up there at Smart Salting. But again, our staff there had never heard of it, and we started to do that. And we started in the contractor we have, and we still have up there, went head over heels, and they're pretty much almost doing 100% brine solution now, doing the liquid applications up there. And then the postseason walkthrough. So not only are we checking for salt damage, but we're looking for physical damage as well. Things happen, you know, curbs get broke, retaining walls get broke. Here, one of our sidewalk contractors hit it with a snowblower, and it just hit it right, you know, and it blew it over. Obviously, they knew they did it in the heat of the battle, but we go through and we check everything to make sure, you know, that there's accountability for whatever's happened. We're making sure that and then we're getting those repairs done before the next season, because if you let things go from season to season, it's hard to sometimes keep track of what has been done the previous years. Then we also clean our ramps every year as well. There's chlorides in there, and all of the work we went through previously on repairing the ramps. We'd always repaired them in the past, but we even put more emphasis on it in the cleaning procedure to make sure to try to extract all the chlorides that we do put down onto the ramp. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Casey Olson, and Casey's going to go through some of the metrics we've developed through the years. And again, this was a combined effort with our contractors and our internal staff.
Thanks, Wayne. So yeah, we're just going to go through some results here, kind of talk through our graphics that we've got on screen. But just kind of the first note is to make that, as Wayne mentioned, we had all of the training done for our contractors and site teams done in the Madison area in the off season between 2018-19 and 2019-2020 season. So the 2018-2019 season is our official baseline. So that was our year where we had yet to do any type of SaltWise reductions before any training was done. So that was kind of where we were at before all of this. And then you can see right away in between from that training the next season, 2019-2020, we actually had a 39% reduction in that first year. And then after that, we saw a 57% reduction compared to the baseline. And then this past season, a 67% reduction. So kind of to get into that a little bit further, the way that we're understanding what our reductions are is we're comparing things to what the winter severity index is. And we're using the winter severity index from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. So within that severity index, they're looking at the duration of the storm, the accumulation of snow, the number of events, and then the number of incidents. So that total number throughout the winter helps us so that we can see what that just make the things comparable. Instead of saying we used less salt because we had less storms, now we can actually say we had more reductions because we actually did it. And even when storms are still heavy, that we're applying at the correct rate and doing it the correct way. In addition, on these graphs, you can see we have a difference between the top and the bottom one. The top one is actually showing our pounds per square foot, as that was a ratio that had to be put in place as we started to close down some of our lots during COVID. So we didn't want to say we're doing everything or we're applying less salt on the same amount of square footage when we weren't. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't skewing the data in any way. As you can see, kind of when we look at just total tonnage in the salt usage in the Madison area on the bottom graph, that number kind of is going at a further downward trend. Rather, we are still going down, but obviously we had a decreased amount of square footage on our properties. The last thing to mention, as Wayne did, just overall savings when it comes to operational and infrastructure. We saved a large amount when it comes to just purchasing of salt and the amount of time it takes to put it down. When you're doing it right, as well as the infrastructure, then after that, you don't have to worry about it as much, and there's less to be repaired. The other savings we saw actually in entryway threshold cleaning. So as people were coming in, they were tracking less salt into the buildings, which then led us to have less cleaning operations there for our cleaning services. Overall, that was kind of just the quick results of things. We can probably take some questions here, answer anything, and be happy to talk further.
It's like Michelle.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I see Michelle has her hand raised there. So what you got?
I had a quick question on the last slide, if you wouldn't mind going back.
Yeah.
So the top graph, you're saying the pounds per square foot, the square footage that you included did not include the parking lots that you shut down?
Yeah, so as we were closing areas, we were taking them out of the square footage, or total square footage that was being salted.
Okay, and then the total salt tonnage just includes all of it.
It's just all tonnage every year.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm, because that is quite a lot that went down still, taking out those parking lots that you said were shut down. So that's very awesome.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is obviously we still are putting salt down, but we're wanting to do it the correct way. As you can see, we've come a long way from where we were to begin with, but we still do have we have a few facilities in the Madison area, so got to make sure that everyone's being safe and everything.
So I have another question. So I know you said that you didn't see a spike in, people slipping or, falling when you did this. Do you guys, you said you were tracking that. Did you ever overlay this against the baseline years that you have to see OSHA recordables or slips, trips, and falls that you did have out of your system to, against the layout?
Yeah, the baseline year in 2018-19, I believe we had, so I guess to clarify before we get into numbers, everything that we are recording from slip and falls are ones that are reported to us through our safety, our protection and safety team. So if someone were to fall on their own and not say anything, we wouldn't necessarily know. But when it's claimed through the protection and safety team, that's when we can report it. So the first year on all of our facilities, we only saw 2 falls, and then every year since, we've only actually seen 1 every year. So this is also, we can probably account due to the fact that there was less occupancy in the buildings due to COVID. So there's a little bit of skewing there, but either way, there was no spike in or increase in slip and falls for those who were coming in the building.
When you did have those incidents of a person falling, did you have your safety professionals pushing to increase the salt after those incidents happened? I know that I've seen that at some of the facilities I've worked for is, one person ends up falling and then, all facilities are like, hey, push to put more salt because somebody fell, we're not doing enough. And how you would go about like combating that gut reaction or that, quick reaction that might not be accurate as, hey, there's other things we can do, is how you guys would handle that.
Yeah, I don't think we certainly, our environmental protection and safety team did, dig deeper, but we never got any requests to go back. We would always look to see how that area looks, but we never got any pushback from anybody to say, hey, this is ridiculous, or this has just created more problems.
The main times where we've seen slip and falls, which is usually, I think, when everyone does, is during those freeze thaw events in the fall and spring, or as we've seen in this winter, we've had some of those high temperatures and then dropping down again. So a lot of some of this has also just been working with our operational staff at buildings to have the kind of those knowledge and target areas. So if we know an area is going to be icy probably that next morning, maybe putting cones out the day before, or trying to just kind of make awareness around it. I think Wayne might have mentioned it, but we also send out internal, like an internal announcement to the entire company at the beginning of the year, just saying, hey, winter's here. Wear proper boots when you come into the office, make sure that you're aware of things, and trying to make sure that everyone is playing their part as much as they can.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions, Michelle, thank you. Any other questions for Casey, Wayne, or even Allison?
Looks like Allison might have been answering some things in the chat as well.
I might ask her to just paraphrase all of that for us, but before, I actually had a question that came up. Allison, you had sent or showed us a picture of what bad storage looks like. Can you just talk about what good storage looks like for salt piles, if there is such a thing?
Yeah. So I mean, number one, it would be like full containment of the salt. So it's protected from water, from rain, snow, wind. Otherwise you're losing salt. It's clumping up, it's just a waste of that product. So that I'd say that would be number one, would just be like storage. Just like, basic storage practices. We could talk more about, kind of like making sure that, I'm just going to leave it at that for this purpose. We've got more information. I actually have an article that I put together on storage. So happy to send that along. But
Great. And then maybe you could just paraphrase for us those of us who aren't scientists, some of the detailed questions about, different components in the salt and liquid and brine, and kind of some of that conversation.
Yeah. So again, would highly recommend Stacy's webinar for a kind of more in-depth dive into this. But basically, when we think about like solid deicers, almost all the products out there are going to be straight like rock salt, which could have bits of rock in it, but it's mined right from the earth, and it's primarily going to be sodium chloride. It's cheapest, so it's what we use. Again, only effective down to about 15 to 20 Fahrenheit. So when we get beneath that is when we start to see the use of other chloride family deicers. So sodium, we go from sodium chloride to including magnesium chloride, calcium chloride. So lower melting points, but also they are more expensive. Kind of put that in there. There are non-chloride deicers that again are more expensive, but you're reducing that damage that chloride does. So you're saving on the back end by not damaging your hardscaping and your landscaping. But there are no environmentally friendly deicers. It's lies. There's no truth in labeling out there for deicers. So if you're putting a chemical down, it's going to have an impact. But in terms of like, if we can keep that on, like kind of moving into maybe grassy areas. So chlorides do continue to move through. Your rain gardens are not protecting anyone from deicers, but they can be kind of storage areas if you use an organic deicer. If that organic material can be broken up by microbes in the soil, but otherwise, a lot of people want to say like, oh, beet juice, like, isn't that really great? Well, no, I mean, if all those sugars end up in our water, now we're feeding microbes in the water. And as they eat and multiply, they're pulling oxygen out of the water. So that's not a solution either. There's no silver bullet here. Yeah, so an organic deicer would be something with at least an organic component to it. So Wayne mentioned CMA, calcium magnesium acetate. So that acetate ion is organic. Potassium formate is another example of an organic. And again, here, organic in the loosest term, meaning that it has carbon in it. It's made up of something with carbon, something it's like a sugar to microbes, right? They can eat it, they can break it down. Versus sodium chloride or magnesium chloride, those ions are permanent pollutants in our water because they cannot be broken down further.
That reminds me, I had a question in the registration about sand use. Can you speak to that? Is that an alternative or?
Yeah, so sand can make sense to provide traction. It's not a de-icer, so it's not going to, take care of that ice problem, but it can provide traction. And oftentimes recommended, again, if we're below that 15 degrees, sometimes that might be, what your goal is. Sand can lead to problems if like a municipality was going to put sand up and down streets. That sand makes its way into storm sewers, and then it can cause a lot of sedimentation issues. It can fill up storm sewers, could degrade your rain gardens. So I think you want to, think twice about using it on such a large scale, but, potentially on steps, sidewalks, that could definitely make sense.
Thank you. So we have a few more minutes. Does anybody else have any questions for any of the team here?
Oh,
go ahead.
I just had one more question of somebody I think I knew back in college used to use like black sunflower seeds on their personal driveway because it had some salt, and then the birds would eat it and black would attract the sun. I don't know. Is there any truth to that and what they were doing? Is that good?
Yeah, we actually recommend bird seed for homeowners. If you want to help feed the birds, like you said, I mean, there can be some salts in there. Can do a little bit of melting, but anything black is going to be absorbing more solar radiation, right? And helping that melting. We don't want to throw bird seed up and down the road, right? But I think, on your sidewalks, I haven't personally experimented with it because my goal is always to get out there as early as I can and get the snow up. Again, I have a really nice blade on my shovel. And usually even like a day like today, it was kind of overcast here in Madison, but I got out there and then the sun did the rest. So that's usually what my aim is.
You saw the sun, Allison. Not here.
There's no real sun. I mean, it's gray. It's gray, but yeah.
Great. Other questions? I know we have some facility people on the call, so any specific things that you have for the American Family team? Questions about your policies, or do you want to add anything that's worked for you at your campus? All right. Well, I think we can call it a wrap then. Thank you so much, both Allison, Wayne, and Casey for being here, for sharing your stories. Most of the links we try to drop in the chat, so we encourage you to join the Salt Awareness Week that was dropped in there. And like I said, I will email this recording out if you want to share it with others in your facility. Please do so. That's part of the message, right? Helping get the message out. So again, thank you all for your time, and happy winter.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Bye.